All right, just let me know if I'm not speaking loud enough, please, because I have no idea. All right, so my name is Travis White, and the name of my talk is Cartographic Pleasures. And I'm going to be talking about a very famous piece of popular culture and the processes of mimicry, inspiration, and creativity. This is the album cover that inspired this whole project that I've been working on for the past several years. It is perhaps the most famous data visualization in popular culture. It's the artwork to Joy Division's first album, released in 1979, Unknown Pleasures. And Joy Division, if you are not familiar with them, they were a massively influential post-punk band from Manchester, England. They had a very short-lived career. They only released 2 albums, one in '79, Unknown Pleasures, and Closer in 1980, before lead singer Ian Curtis committed suicide. And their music is kind of reflected in that story. Their brief, tumultuous career, the suicide. Their music is very haunting. It's beautiful, but it's dark, atmospheric, passionate. And this is the cover to that album in a little bit more detail. It's now commonly referred to as a joy plot or a ridgeline plot. I also refer to them as transect maps if they show geographic data. And this one specifically plots the radio intensities from the first known pulsar. But those specific pieces of information are largely irrelevant. They're irrelevant to popular culture, and they're irrelevant to the band's fans. What is relevant is how this mysterious, unlabeled image so perfectly captures the sound and vision of Joy Division. The vision and the sound of the band's music. It is a remarkable synthesis of, I would say, the visual and the aural. And even if you've never heard of Joy Division, you can get a pretty good idea of what their sound is, what their music sounds like, just by looking at this image. You can see that atmospheric, that haunting atmospheric, that intensity. And I suspect, that a large reason for the band's enduring popularity, or perhaps more relevant, its long-term visibility, is due to this man, Peter Saville. Peter Saville was the co-founder and graphic designer for Factory Records, Joy Division's label. And whether you recognize his name or his face, his influence on album artwork in the 1980s, on typography through the late 70s and 1980s cannot be overstated. And you're probably very familiar with his work, even if you don't know his name or face. There are a lot of excellent histories of this album cover online, and so I encourage you to look them up. I provide links for them at the end of this slide, but these are the 2 most relevant images. On the left is the original, which was published in a 1970 PhD thesis by a radio astronomer, Harold Croft. And this image landed in the hands of the band, who passed it along to Saville, who finally created the final image that is displayed on the right, the album cover itself. In a recent interview, Saville had this to say about the visualization's enduring popularity. He said, "It's a sort of palimpsest, a kind of template which people continue to interpret in either deeply serious, melodramatic, or iconic ways. It's the endless possible interpretations of this diagram that make it so powerful and useful." And I think it's very important that you pay attention to this last line. That was transcribed by me, so a couple of the words may be off, but I think that what he said rings true. I have treated this diagram, this joy plot, as a palimpsest through 2 separate related uses. First, through direct imitation, through direct mimicry of Saville's artwork, and then second, by exploring the potential of the joy plot's structure. And I think that there's a definite tension between these 2, which I consider the Joy Division or Unknown Pleasures aesthetic, and then the joy plot aesthetic. And so I'm just going to discuss mimicry, inspiration, and creativity. And I have to begin with mimicry because that's how this project began. It was a straight-up imitation of the Unknown Pleasures album cover. A few years ago, I was teaching intermediate cartography, and I was attempting to teach my students how to make and use transects, elevation profiles, and concepts of vertical exaggeration. And I thought that by mapping a recognizable landmark in the unknown pleasures style would make for a fun project. And it had three main components. There was the GIS, the Python scripting, and then we did some post work in Illustrator. And each student was responsible for their own transects, and this is what we finally produced. These were all of the transects in profile. And then once we compiled and stylized them, we had a map of Crater Lake. And I thought this project was fun, but it so clearly and purposely mimics that unknown pleasures, that joy division aesthetic. And such mimicry is the most common form of this particular aesthetic. It's most typical, I think, in just straight up recreations of the album art, whether they're personal tattoos you put on your body or commercial apparel that you buy, shirts, bags, shoes, Doc Martens. And this is understandable because I think that when people have an affinity for a band, they love to display it in some way, buy a t-shirt for that cool band that you really like. But then there are countless derivatives which exploit Saville's artwork while making very little or zero sense. And I have to say that I find these extremely aggravating, but they're harmless by and large. And very often it's something or some place that has shoehorned or has been shoehorned into that unknown pleasures aesthetic. And nearly all of it is just exploitation for purely commercial purposes. Byproduct X, Y, or Z, because it reminds you of that one thing you've seen before. It looks cool. And on a completely unrelated aesthetic, but a similar topic, Ken Field has written extensively on how Becksploitation, or the exploitation of Beck's underground tube map, has been subjected to so many similar derivatives. And you find that here with this singular style. So what is it that inspires people to continually exploit the unknown pleasures aesthetic, but they don't ever really explore the data structure, the potential of the joy plot? And really, can you even claim that these products are the result of inspiration, or are they just straight up mimicry? So inspiration. As a cartographic device, I think that the structure of the joy plot has so much potential. It takes a very minimalist approach to displaying geographic data. And I love cartographic minimalism. It speaks to me. So, as a form, it has inspired many mappers, not just me. Nothing I'm doing here is unique or mine alone. And you can find many contemporary and historical examples. A recent example, this is from 2013. It's a map, Population Lines, by Dr. James Cheshire. And it shows population density by latitude. I think it is absolutely sublime. It is undeniably, it was purposely designed to mimic the unknown pleasure style. Cheshire said so himself. But the styling and labeling of the key cities, you can see, Shanghai, Tokyo, Paris, they're differently colored and, they're labeled. So it's so effective. It's an incredibly effective representation. And in the joy plot structure, I think it just puts it over the top. And it makes it uniquely Cheshire's own creation, although it was definitely inspired by that joy division aesthetic. This is a much older example. This map is from 1850, and I was made aware of it by Tim Wallace on Twitter. But it uses the same basic premise. You have a single geographic phenomenon. In this case, it's street elevation or street altitude. And it's mapped along common lines of reference, in this case, avenues of New York City. And I thought this was interesting, so I tried to create my own version of it. And this is fairly shoddy. I think it's effective, but it is clearly a pale imitation of the 1850 original. But I also think that you don't see the unknown pleasures aesthetic in this map. You definitely get that joy plot aesthetic. It's designed to take advantage of the overlapping filled lines. But again, unknown pleasures, nowhere to be found. But if I take the same map and just swap the color so it's white lines on a dark background, two things happen. One, that elevation data are now incomprehensible. You can't compare them. They're just lost in the background. And then the map just looks like a really poor, ineffective imitation or interpretation of these aesthetics. It doesn't work. And that's one of the problems, I think, and one of the strengths of the original artwork. It is so starkly beautiful. It is mysterious. It's unlabeled. You don't know what it's showing, but it looks cool. But its potential, the potential of the joy plot and transect maps is very obvious to me. And the unknown pleasures aesthetic is so singularly the band's and Peter Saville's that, while I love the form, I really have no interest in mimicking or even attempting that particular emotional resonance. And I can only speculate, but I think that if Saville had selected a pop of color, then this would have diminished the original's impact, and I suspect that this visualization would not be nearly as popular or well-known as it is today. And if he had used something even more colorful, it just wouldn't have been true to the band's musical aesthetic. So the challenge is, how do I find my own aesthetic? How do I take my own artwork, acknowledge that it is, yes, mimicry, yes, it was clearly inspired by, the original artwork, but something that is my own. Mimicry comes easy. Inspiration comes easy. I think that anybody who's attended any one of the sessions at this conference walks away inspired with a particular mapping style or just some concept that they want to pursue for themselves. And, with a little work and a little imagination, it really is easy to turn those things into something that is joyful in your own. And for myself, the really simple ingredient is color. So before I talk about the color, I just want to talk about how joy plots are made and why I've started making them again. So I started this back in about 2015, but last year, in 2017, they became a minor viral sensation following the release of an R package called GG Joy. It's now called GG Ridges by Klaus Wilk. And a lot of people have started making transect maps or joy maps and joy plots. And this package really shortened my workflow. It made everything really easy and manageable. And so this is my particular workflow. I can do everything in R. I can do everything in QGIS or ARC, but I don't like the results, so I prefer to use a three-step process. And I am very much a GUI person. I need that graphic user interface. So my current workflow goes through these steps. One, I start in ARC or QGIS, either works, and it gives me better control of where I place my transects and the map projection capabilities. And then in R, I actually create the joy plots themselves. And then because R has a very difficult stylization environment, you can create a million different plots, charts, graphics in R. It's clunky. So then I import things into Illustrator where it's very easy for me to fine-tune type and little styles on the line work themselves. But the color, going back to the color, this is what makes it my own. This is not what makes it unique, mind you. This is just how I feel that my work is my own creation. It is through what I call, it's a generic idea, but I call it, or I've dubbed it, emotive colorization. I don't think this is a thing. This is just shorthand for my thought process. And that is, I create a transect for a place that I like or is near and dear to my heart. For example, this is the Los Angeles Southland, going from basically Malibu on the left all the way into the Inland Empire and the Salton Sea, Palm Springs on the right. Now, I moved to Los Angeles in 2000, and before I did, I had one concept of what Los Angeles was like, and that was the album art to Live and Die in LA. That smoggy, that low smog, those beautiful sunsets, but it's kind of grimy. So that color is still what I think of when I think of Los Angeles. Even though you don't really find it, I lived in Los Angeles for a long time, and doesn't often get that nasty. But that's what I do. I apply an easy stylized color to both the background and a slight gradient to the lines themselves. And it's appealing to me. These colors are arbitrarily selected to my own emotive, preference at the time. Now, another example is Death Valley National Park. And instead of some arbitrary emotion, it's how I think of the place using imagery or pictures. And so in this case, Death Valley National Park, I don't think of smog. I think of baked desert. So this is some imagery from NASA. Now, this is not technically Death Valley National Park. This is the Mojave Desert, but it's close enough. But I pick a couple of colors, and I apply the same sort of very straightforward, simple visualization. Color application, and so you have this visualization on the right. And it looks pretty to me. That's it. It looks pretty to me, it speaks to me, I'm happy with it, and I move on. The other fun thing is that these scripts make it so easy to play around with relative relief and vertical exaggeration. So I live in Kansas City. When I drive around Kansas City, it looks like there's a lot of relative relief. It looks hilly, you've got river valleys. But on the right is vertical exaggeration at 8 times. On the left is what it really is. Kansas City is very flat. It's very flat. But in your mind, it looks crazy and dynamic. I mean, in every place, I think, in the world looks like that. So, yeah, again, earlier this year, I dusted off my Twitter account and started posting a bunch of these maps that I've been using to create an atlas. And I'm creating this atlas, again, just for my own amusement, but I'm highlighting 2 things. One, famous locations, urban and natural place, urban cities, national parks, natural features that we know. But I'm also including a legend in the spread. So you take a transect line, and then you show how it changes with vertical exaggeration. So you can see the reality. Here's Crater Lake in reality. It's unremarkable via transects, but you exaggerate it, and it looks pretty nifty. And make no mistake, I can't emphasize this enough. These were all absolutely inspired by the Unknown Pleasures album artwork. But through a variety of subtle and not so subtle design decisions, I do feel that I've created something that expresses my own cartographic vision. And this has led me to the next step in my form of creation, and that is wood cutting and woodblock printing. The other beauty of this style, the simplicity of the line work, is that you can laser etch it, route it, or you can hand carve it. So my daughter and I have started hand carving some of these maps, and I actually included this one up on the screen. It's in the map gallery, and some of you made your own maps using this simple print, this simple block to make your own simple prints. And it's exciting to me because it's just another expression. All of these maps created on the computer, they're fun, but they're kind of, I find them somewhat lifeless. Whereas these, I mean, there's much more, there's some blood, sweat, and tears involved in this. And so my parting advice with this is take something that's super popular, so well known, the Joy Division album cover, and it really is easy to be inspired by it, and it really is easy to create with it. But you just make sure you don't copy. And also don't worry if other people have latched onto the same obvious idea and are creating for themselves. 2 examples I put up in the map gallery. Nelson Stauffer put together an art package that animates these transect lines. You can see that they're slightly waving, undulating. Rob Hawks in the UK, he made this map, really cool map of Ireland and Great Britain for Shetlands now in its appropriate little inset box. So you can see the mainlands a little better, or the islands a little bit better. And then, of course, Ken Field put together a tutorial for Arc Pro, which is really nifty and super easy to do. You can also create unholy mashups of these styles. So now I've got my horrible attempt to shoehorn the Joy Plot aesthetic, the Joy Division aesthetic in Anton's hand-drawn maps. I did this in like 5 minutes, but this is an even worse attempt to capture David's fictitious creativity. And then final co-presenter, I actually kind of like this one. It's a Firefly Joy map. It glows, it pops, it looks like neon tubes. It's pretty nifty. But these are all easy to create. And so I encourage you to go through these references, explore how to make it, and speak to me if you want to create your own maps. Because I've got the system down. One of these days I'll publish a tutorial online, but I'm more than happy to demonstrate for you how to do it, because these aren't mine. These are just something that I enjoy and want everyone else to enjoy and create for themselves. Thanks.